June June 18th, 2016. So we can start with the homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, good morning, everybody. Okay, so we've been examining the first sutta in the Majjhima Nikāya. This is called the Mūlapariyāya Sutta, the discourse on the root. And the sutta begins when the Buddha says to the monks, he says, I will teach you a discourse on the root of all things, Dhamma Mūlapariyāyang Bhikkhave Dese Sami. And so you could see just from the title of the sutta, or the description of it, that it's an extremely deep and important sutta. It's a kind of sutta that cuts through all excessive verbiage and takes us directly to understanding the root of this whole process of beginningless samsara. And the sutta unfolds, as I said last week, as a description of the cognitive process of four types of individuals. Yeah, I don't think I have a copy of myself. Okay, so the four types of individuals is beginning from the lowest going up, is the uninstructed worldling, or the untaught ordinary person, then the learner or trainee, the one on the path, and third is the disciple Arahant, and then the fourth is the Buddha himself. And so last week we described the section, we examined the section on the cognitive process of the uninstructed worldling. And the text explains this cognitive process in relation to 24 objects, which I call the 24 bases of conceiving. And so it begins, it takes, as the fullest example, it takes the way the worldling thinks about the earth element. And so it begins when the ordinary person first perceives earth, then perceives earth as earth. And as the commentary explains, perceiving earth as earth means that already a subtle distortion has entered even into the perception of the ordinary person, the uninstructed ordinary person, so that the ordinary person grasps upon the percept and takes it as indicative of some kind of solid, substantial, self-existent entity. Then from the perception, the cognitive process moves into the way the ordinary person thinks about the object of perception. And this thinking is described by the word or the verb manyati, which is translated here as conceives. Or we might even maybe more accurately render this misconceives. And then the text explains different ways in which the ordinary person misconceives the earth element. And these ways are distinguished according to what are called different modes of declension of nouns in Pali. Declension of a noun means, oh, this gets a bit too complicated. Okay, in English it's indicated by prepositions. You see, we don't decline our nouns, but we use prepositions to show their grammatical position. Okay, so he conceives earth. He conceives earth. So this is the accusative case. So he conceives in earth. In Pali, this is the locative case, setting up location. He conceives apart from earth. That's the ablative case, establishing a difference. He conceives earth to be mine. This shows the sort of where grasping enters into the cognitive process. And then he delights in earth. And delights here, the word delights implies that there's some subtle craving involved in sort of trying to extract the pleasure or enjoyment out of the object. And then the reason, the Buddha raises the question, why is that? What is the reason for that? The reason is because he has not fully understood it. And full understanding, according in the Sutta way of explanation, that is the prerogative of the Arahant. It's only the Arahant who has fully understood the whole domain of experience. Okay, so that is the passage on the ordinary person, beginning with the earth element, then it brings in the other three material elements, water, fire, and air. Then it brings in beings. These are taken to be the beings in the lower realms. Then the gods, various classes of gods. Then it goes to the four formless or immaterial realms of existence, the base of infinite space, infinite consciousness, nothingness, neither perception nor non-perception. Then we have a set of four terms, a way of classifying the objects of perception, the seen, visible forms, the heard, sounds, the sensed, the objects of the other three senses, odors, tastes, tactile sensations. Then the pair of unity and diversity, then the all, and finally even nibbana. Okay, so that is just a review of what we covered last week. Okay, and now we come to the next section. Now I'm on page 87, about to start section 27. This is the description of the cognitive process of the type of person who is called in Pali the Seka. Okay, the word Seka, it's related to the noun Sika. Sika means training. And so the texts sometimes speak about the three types of training. Adisila Sika, the training in the higher virtuous behavior. Adicita Sika, the training in the higher mind, which means the training in concentration or samadhi. And then adipanya sika, the training in the higher wisdom. And so one who undertakes these three types of training is called a seka, a learner. Here's the word is used. Yeah, the disciple in higher training. I render seka. But technically, the word seka has a technical meaning. In a broad sense, it can signify anybody who's engaged in the training. But in a more specific or more precise technical sense, it signifies one who has reached at least the irreversible path of stream entry, up to and including one who has reached the path to arahantship. But not yet the arahant, or not the arahant, because the arahant has finished the training. Okay, now in between the uninstructed worldling or the untaught ordinary person and the seka in this narrow sense, there's another type of person who is not described in the sutta. And I hope this is where most of us will find ourselves if we're not yet sekas or arahats. And this is called the kalyana putujana. The kalyana putujana, this means the good or virtuous worldling. So this person is called a putujana, a worldling or an ordinary person, in the sense that he has not yet reached the irreversible path to stream entry. But he's different from the uninstructed worldling, the untaught ordinary person, in that the virtuous worldling has gained acquaintance, some knowledge of the noble teaching, and is engaged in the practice of the teaching, the serious and sincere practice of the teaching. So this is the person who is still short of, you could say that this is the sort of the threshold, which we call the breakthrough. And above this, one is on the irreversible path to the final goal. And then here, below this, is the realm of the ordinary, uninstructed ordinary persons. And then here we have the virtuous worldlings who have not yet eradicated any defilements, but are still practicing, accept the Dharma out of trust or confidence, have taken up at least the firm adherence to the precepts, and are engaged in training the mind in mindfulness, concentration, or wisdom. But in this sutta, here the Buddha is speaking about one who is a trainee or disciple in training in the technical sense, one who has reached at least the path of stream entry. Okay, so the text says about this kind of person, now I'll read from the text. Here, a bhikkhu who is one in higher training, that is the bhikkhu who is a seka. Whose mind has not yet reached the goal, and who is still aspiring to the supreme security from bondage. This is the anuttarang yoga kemang, release from the bonds of sensual desire, craving for existence, views, wrong views, and ignorance. Okay, of this disciple, it says that he directly knows earth as earth. And so I presume that there is has to be a stage in which even this disciple in higher training has the perception of earth. That seems to be, though it's not mentioned in the sutta, but it's understood. Because in order to understand anything, one first has to perceive it. Okay, but in the case of the worldling, first he perceives earth, then he perceives earth as earth. That is, he grasps upon the perception, the percept, and takes it to be indicative, to be signifying some kind of solid, substantial reality. But in the case of the disciple in higher training, it says, he directly knows earth as earth. And here the verb used is abhijanati. Okay, if we know anything about Pali, we know that the verb janati means to know. So we have many verbs constructed on the basis of janati. Like even the verb pajanati, to understand, from which we get panya, wisdom, is based on janati. And the prefix abhi suggests something superior. So this is a superior kind of, a superior way of knowing. It's not just like knowing simply as a matter of fact, but it's knowing in terms, you could say knowing in depth, knowing clearly, knowing accurately. And also, abhi suggests directness. So that's why we render it directly knows. And in the sutta way of explanation, this usually means knowing in terms of, we call the framework of the Four Noble Truths. So one knows a thing in terms of its essential characteristics, particularly knowing things to be impermanent, dukkha, unsatisfactory, and non-self. Then knowing the origin of the thing, knowing its cessation, and knowing the way to its cessation. Okay, so the disciple in higher training directly knows earth as earth. So this would be knowing the essential characteristic of the earth element, knowing the origin, cessation, and way to cessation in regard to the earth element. Okay, then the text goes on to say, having directly known earth as earth, now we have an injunction, that is an imperative, a command. Following the Pali says that he must not conceive, having directly known earth as earth, he should not conceive earth. He should not conceive in earth. He should not conceive apart from earth. He should not conceive earth to be mine. He should not delight in earth. And for should not conceive, the Pali has mani. See, in the case of the worldling, it said manyati. The worldling conceives or misconceives. But in the case of the disciple in training, the text says manyi. Ma is used for a prohibition, a negative imperative. Do not, must not, should not. And in this way, should not conceive. So he should not conceive earth to be mine. He should not delight in earth. And why is that? And then the text says, because he must fully understand it, or he should fully understand it. So the Pali has parinyayang. So parinyayang comes from the verb parijanati, which also you could see is based on that verb janati, to know. Am I getting too academic? Too pedantic? You see, we have some of the students here are also my Pali students, so I'm sometimes not completely clear whether I'm in a Pali class or a simple Sutta class. But it's useful to see the interconnections of these words, which they sometimes get lost in translation. So, abhijanati, the disciple in training, has abhijanati. He has this direct knowledge, but not yet parijanati, not yet that full or complete understanding. And so the purpose of training is to advance from abhijanati, from direct knowledge or higher knowledge, to parijanati, to full understanding. And to be able to advance, the disciple is given this injunction or command: do not misconceive what you are perceiving. Okay, now according to the commentaries, there are 3 roots of misconception, 3 modes in which conceiving takes place. I think I explained this last week. That is, the 3 sort of modes of conceiving are craving, conceit, and wrong views. And so through craving, one is inclined to take things to be mine. Through conceit, one develops or gives rise to the idea, I am. First, the idea of I speak, I do, I think, I act, and behind all of this there seems to be an I. And so we grasp on the idea of I, and we think, since there's this I who's doing and thinking all of these things, therefore I am. And then one speculates about what is this I, and then one comes up with a theory, a doctrine, a belief, a thesis about what I am, and that is the view of self, the wrong views of self. Okay, now the disciple in the higher training, when he reaches the stage of stream entry, he eradicates which of these 3 kinds of conceiving? Craving, conceit, and views. Which does the disciple in training eliminate? What? Okay. One says craving and conceit. Jin says wrong views. Okay, Jin is correct. Because at the level of stream entry, the disciple sees into the truth of the Dhamma and eliminates all views of self and all the other wrong views that develop out of the views of self. But even the disciple in training still has craving and conceit. And because of this still craving and conceit, the disciple can still engage in misconceiving in terms of craving and conceit. And so therefore the Buddha gives this injunction, do not misconceive. When he says, do not misconceive, it has nothing anymore to do with wrong views, but it means do not conceive things in terms of craving as potential objects to be mine, and do not conceive in terms of conceit with the idea of I am. And there's a beautiful little sutta which illustrates this, or a little sutta that illustrates this beautifully. I asked Lorena to send it out with the announcement yesterday. And this is a sutta that occurs in the Samyutta Nikāya, chapter 22, the connected discourses on the 5 aggregates, and it's sutta number 89. It's called the Kemaka Sutta because the monk who speaks is named Kemaka. Okay, so when the sutta opens, there's this monk named Kemaka who is sick, afflicted, gravely ill. And then he meets with a number of elder monks, and after they exchange greetings, I cut out that part of the discourse since it's not so necessary. Then they ask the Venerable Kemaka, they say, there are these 5 aggregates subject to clinging, spoken about by the Buddha. So that's the material form, aggregate, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness. Do you regard anything among these 5 aggregates as the self or as belonging to the self? Do you have any view of self in regard to these 5 aggregates? And then Venerable Kemaka says that I do not regard any of these 5 aggregates as the self or as belonging to the self. Okay, so then the elder monks think, or they say to him, if you don't regard anything among the 5 aggregates as a self or as belonging to a self, that means you must be an Arahant, one who has eliminated all of the asavas, the defilements. But Kemaka is much wiser than these other monks. So he says, even though I don't regard any of these 5 aggregates as the self or as belonging to a self, still I am not an Arahant. For the notion I am has not yet been eliminated by me in relation to these 5 aggregates. But I do not regard any among them as this I am. So you could see that initially there's the notions, a very primordial notion, very fundamental notion, I am, which arises just spontaneously. But then when we grasp upon that notion, I am, and then we reflect, what am I? And then we come to some conclusion, this I am. I am this. I am that. Doing so in terms of the 5 aggregates. I am the body, or I am the owner of the body. I am feeling, perception, mental formations, consciousness. I am standing behind consciousness, the owner of consciousness. Then one has formulated a view of self. One has defined the notion I am as this I am. Okay, so then when Kemaka says this, then the other monks say, when you speak of this I am, what is it that you speak of as I am? You see, you could see from this that the elder monks still have Sakaya Ditti. They still have a subtle view of self, even though if they understand non-self, they won't actually formulate a doctrine of self, but still they have some assumption, where they make the assumption that there must be something corresponding to this I am. So they say, what is it that you speak of as I am? Is it form that you speak of as I am, or do you speak of I am apart from form? You see, even this is sort of mirroring that grammatical structure that we see in the discourse on the root. Either it's this or apart from this. Do you speak of feeling, perception, volitional formations, consciousness as I am? Or do you speak of I am apart from consciousness? So what is it that you call, that you are thinking of when you say you have this notion, I am? And then Kamaka replies, I do not speak of form, feeling, perception, volitions, consciousness as I am, nor do I speak of I am apart from consciousness. Although the notion I am has not yet vanished in me in relation to the five aggregates, still I do not regard anything among them as this I am. And then he gives a simile of the scent of a lotus flower. And he says, would one be speaking rightly if one would say the scent belongs to the petals, the scent belongs to the stalk, the scent belongs to the pistils? And the answer is no. And to answer rightly, one would say that the scent belongs to the flower, not to one part or the other. And so then Kamaka repeats the same thing and says, I do not speak of form as I am, or I am apart from form. Although the notion I am has not yet vanished in me in relation to these five aggregates, still I do not regard anything among them as this I am. Then he explains, even though a noble disciple has abandoned the five lower fetters, this is a disciple at the stage of non-returner, just one stage short of arhatship. Still, in relation to the five aggregates, subject to clinging, there lingers in him a residual conceit, I am, a residual desire, I am, a residual underlying tendency, I am, that has not yet been uprooted. So we can see that there's the conceit, I am, so conceit is still there. The desire is craving, I am, is still there. And there's this underlying tendency for the idea, I am, to arise. So that idea, I am, has not yet been uprooted. But sometime later he dwells contemplating the arising and passing away in the five aggregates. And then as he contemplates arising and passing away in the five aggregates, then that residual conceit, I am, desire, I am, underlying tendency, I am, comes to be uprooted, eliminated. And then he compares this, he uses a simile to illustrate this. It's like a cloth that has been soiled and stained, and so its owners give it to a laundryman. Then, this is the way of washing clothes in ancient India. So the laundryman then scours it with cleaning salt, lye, or cow dung, and rinses it in clean water. And so even though that cloth becomes pure and clean, it still retains a residual smell of the cleaning salt, lye, or cow dung. The laundryman then gives it back to the owners, and the owners put it in a sweet-scented casket. And as a result, that residual smell of the cleaning salts, lye, or cow dung that had not yet vanished would vanish. And so, even though the noble disciple has abandoned the 5 lower fetters, still there lingers in him this residual conceit, I am, desire, I am, underlying tendency, I am, that was not yet uprooted. But he dwells contemplating, arising and passing away in the 5 aggregates, and as he does so, with the attainment of arhatship, that residual conceit, I am, desire, I am, underlying tendency, I am, is uprooted, eliminated.
Is that residual conceit, is that Pali Canon?
No, the residual, the conceit is what's called asmi mana. Asmi is I am, mana is conceit. But there's also the bhavatana, craving for existence, is still there. And maybe the desire I am is a manifestation of that bhavatana. Okay, so the Buddha, coming back to the sutta, the discourse on the root, the Buddha says that he should not delight in earth. And then he says, for what reason? Why is that? Because he must fully understand it. So I wrote that on the board. Parinyayang. So that he can move from direct knowledge of the objects of perception on to the full understanding of them. Okay, and then the same pattern is developed for the other 23 bases of conceiving. Okay, at this point I'll ask, before we go on to the next section, whether there are any questions on what we've covered. Tsering? Yeah, Tsering in the...
Bhante, just to give us a clearer picture of this section, paragraph 27, if you could kindly give us an example to illustrate this point. For example, here they're talking about the earth element.
Yeah.
So let's say in our own daily experiences, we encounter experiences of meeting beautiful objects.
We can what?
Beautiful objects. So in that light, if you could kindly give us a little more elaboration.
Maybe let me go through and finish the discourse, and then I'll come back to that question.
Thank you, Bhante.
I just wanted questions that sort of relate directly to this section. Okay, so let us move on then. So now we come we move from the disciple and higher training to the Arahant. The Arahant is sometimes called Useka. Useka means one who is not in training. But by not in training, it doesn't mean that somebody who doesn't take up the training at all, but rather the one who has completed the training. And so we have actually three or 4 sections on the Arahant. Okay, so the first of these, we begin with a description of the Arahant. He's one who has destroyed the asavas. The asavas are these very, very deep fundamental defilements of sensual craving, craving for existence, and ignorance. He has lived the brahmacharya, the holy life, vusita brahmacharya. Which means that he's completed the development of the path. The path is the holy life, and one who has completed the development of the path is said to have lived the holy life. He's one who is kattang or katta karaniyo, who has done what had to be done, which means that he's accomplished all of the tasks laid out by the Buddha of fully understanding the truth of suffering, abandoning craving, realizing nibbana, and fulfilling the development of the path. He's laid down the burden of the 5 aggregates, the burden of all defilements. He has reached his own goal. He has destroyed the fetters that bind one to existence, and he is completely liberated through final knowledge. Okay, so the Arahant now is said that he too, like the trainee, directly knows earth as earth. And having directly known earth as earth, he does not conceive earth, he does not conceive in earth, he does not conceive apart from earth, he does not conceive earth to be mine, and he does not delight in earth. Okay, because the Arhat, well, let me continue. Why is that? Because he has fully understood it, I say. Okay, so in the case of the Arhat, the Buddha doesn't have to say he should not conceive it, he must not conceive it, because it's impossible for the Arhat to misconceive any of the objects of experience. And so the Arhat will not misconceive any of the objects of experience by way of craving, conceit, and wrong views. And the reason for that, according to the sutta, is because he has fully understood it. Here we move from pariññāyang, which means one should fully understand it, to pariññātaṃ, which means it has been fully understood. And full understanding, with full understanding, all ignorance is eliminated. And when ignorance is eliminated, then those defilements that are rooted in ignorance, craving, conceit, as well as wrong views, completely fall away. Okay, so this is the first section on the Arahant, in which the reason given for not misconceiving the objects, not delighting in them, is because he has fully understood the object. Okay, now we have 3 additional sections. The next one says, okay, everything is the same up to the point where the Buddha raises the question, why is that? And here the reason given is because he is free from lust through the destruction of lust. Yeah, and the idea of being without lust is indicated, it's underscored or emphasized that this is not just a temporary freedom from lust. For example, somebody enters into the jhanas, and on that occasion, you could say that the mind is free of lust because they're absorbed in this samadhi. But that person is not free from lust through the destruction of lust, because lust is still there as a latent tendency, an underlying tendency, and if the person is careless or heedless, comes out of samadhi and gets attracted by some attractive sense object, or then the lust can arise towards that object. But when the text says he is free from lust through the destruction of lust, that means that there's no possibility of lust arising in the future, because the very underlying root of lust has been eliminated. Okay, then the next section, again it raises the question, why is that? And the answer given, because he is free from hate through the destruction of hate. Again, somebody can be in some state of samadhi. The mind is very calm and peaceful. So in that state of samadhi, there's no hatred. So we could say, for that period, he's free of hatred. But when he comes out, if there's some disturbance, some irritation, then he can become angry, even full of hate. But in the case of the Arhat, even the subtlest tendency to hatred has been eradicated. So he's free from hate through the destruction of hate. And then the next section, again, everything is the same up to the question. And here the question is raised, why is that? Because he is free from delusion through the destruction of delusion. And so here we have that the Arhat, it said, does not misconceive the object, does not delight in it, through the destruction, through the elimination of the 3 unwholesome roots, lust, hatred, and delusion. Okay, so that takes us through the section on the Arahant, and now we come to the section, or 2 sections, on the Tathāgata. It's the Buddha. Okay, the Tathāgata, the Buddha, is also an Arhat, so he has all of those qualities in common with the Arhat. But he's also described as the Sammasambuddha, the perfectly or fully enlightened one. And so there's a little difference in the description of the Tathāgata. Okay, so the text reads, the Tathāgata too accomplished, here the word rendered accomplished is Arahant, which means the Arahat, and then the fully enlightened one, Sammasambuddho, directly knows earth as earth. Okay, having directly known earth as earth, he does not conceive earth, does not conceive in earth, does not conceive apart from earth, does not conceive earth to be mine. He does not delight in earth. Why is that? Okay, then the answer that's given by the text. In Pali, it reads, Pariññātāṃ. Okay, now the word pariññāta means fully understood, and the word antang means end. And so the commentary explains that the full understanding of the Buddha is more complete than the full understanding of the disciple Arahant. And so the Buddha is described, or the Buddha is said to have accomplished pariññātāṃ, that he's fully understood it to the end. I'm actually not so sure that this was the original reading of the text. You know, it could come a simple copyist error. When the texts are transmitted orally or written down in palm leaf manuscripts, the copyist puts in an extra letter and then the commentary reads a different meaning into that extra letter. But we'll just accept the way the text has come down and the commentarial explanation. So it says that whereas an Arahant can achieve liberation, enlightenment and liberation by taking a limited range of the object and then fully understanding it and thereby eliminating the defilements. The Tathāgata, the Buddha, achieves the all-comprehending knowledge, the knowledge that comprehends all dhammas, all phenomena in all of their aspects. And so the Tathāgata is said to fully understand things to the end. Okay, so that is the first section on the Tathāgata. Okay, then the second section on the Tathāgata reads, okay, the Tathāgata, too, accomplished and fully enlightened, directly knows earth as earth. Having directly known earth as earth, he does not conceive earth, and so on. Then why is that? And now we come to a sentence which I think is what gives the title to the sutta. Because he has understood that delight, nandi, that delight is the root of suffering, the root of dukkha. And that with being or existence as condition, first I'll read it, this is very compressed, very compact. Because he has understood that delight is the root of suffering, and that with being or existence as condition, there is birth, and that for whatever has come to be, there is aging and death. What do we see incorporated into this very concise statement? Exactly. This is a very compressed statement of the last part of the formula of dependent origination. And so we have delight. We don't need this anymore. Delight is nandi, which we can take to imply craving and clinging. And delight is the root. It says delight is the root. It's translated, delight is the root of suffering. But suffering here, the Pali word is dukkha, and we know from other suttas that the Buddha says it's the 5 aggregates of clinging that are dukkha. So these are the 5 aggregates, and those constitute existence, bhava, conditioned existence. So when there is conditioned existence, there are the 5 aggregates. Let me put it this way. Okay, and then so this dukkha is equal to bhava. And then existence begins with birth. And so with existence as condition, there is birth. And then with birth as condition, there is old age and death. So here the text is indicating that it's through the Buddha's understanding of dependent origination that the Buddha does not conceive anything or misconceive any of the objects of experience. And then the text goes on to say, therefore, through the complete destruction, fading away, cessation, giving up, and relinquishing of cravings, the Tathāgata has awakened to the supreme full enlightenment. Okay, so that is the second passage in relation to the Tathāgata. Then it just repeats the same thing in regard to the other 24 bases of cognition. Okay, normally I would just say, okay, so that's the end of the sutta, but let's read the very last sentence, or last 2 sentences, because there's something very interesting here. Okay, that is what the Blessed One said, but those bhikkhus did not delight in the Blessed One's words. Why is that? Every other sutta, let's take, okay, the end of sutta number 2 on page 96. That is what the Blessed One said, The bhikkhus were satisfied and delighted in the Blessed One's words. Let's say Sutta number 6, page 117. The bhikkhus were satisfied and delighted in the Blessed One's words. The end of Sutta number 8, page 131. The Venerable Mahachunda was satisfied and delighted in the Blessed One's words. All those suttas, who is ever listening is satisfied and delights in the Blessed One's words. But this is the only sutta in the whole collection of the Buddha's discourses where it says that the monks did not delight in the Blessed One's words.
Is it as simple as because they do not fully understand it, they're not full arahants?
But in the case of many of the others, most of the other suttas, I'd say that the monks don't fully understand it, but they still delight.
Maybe they understood it, but they didn't like it.
That's a good hypothesis.
Too close to home.
That's a very, very good hypothesis. You've read the I say that in the note. Okay.
Ante, I just have a very, they're not, the teaching according to the Lord Buddha's instructions, you're not supposed to delight.
That's a possibility. Wait, I think you have to take the microphone.
Doesn't it mean because they didn't delight, they became arhats, all of them?
And so they didn't have any more delight.
Yeah.
That would be in agreement with what Tsering just said. Okay, so there are several possibilities here. One is that they didn't understand it, and so they were confused by it, and so for that reason they didn't delight in it. In fact, that's what the commentary says, that they didn't like it because it was very, very deep. And these monks, according to the commentary, didn't go to listen to the Buddha speak very often because they were conceited with their Brahminical learning. And so the Buddha spoke this very deep discourse to them, and after listening to it, they couldn't make head or tail out of it, so they didn't understand it, therefore they didn't delight in it. That's one possible explanation. But I like, what is your name? Bob. I like his answer, which sort of agrees a little bit with my own thinking, is that they understood it a little too well, in that if they were, especially if the commentary is right, that they came from a Brahminic background, and sort of the fundamental idea of the Brahminic philosophical systems was the idea that there is this infinite, permanent, eternal, all-comprehending self. And then they sort of understood the implication of the Buddha's teaching is that the idea of the self is a delusion. Then it's sort of like, it strikes very, very deep. A little bit like Richard Dawkins, he's the famous, they call one of the proponents of the new atheism, going into a fundamentalist Baptist church in the South and preaching his belief system of atheism. He'd get himself stoned if he does that. Okay, so that's the second possibility, that they understood it too well. The third possibility, who was it that suggested? I think somebody suggested this, that they follow the Buddha's advice. The Buddha says, do not delight in this, do not delight in that. And so they thought, well, if we shouldn't delight in anything seen, heard, sensed, or cognized, we heard the Buddha's teaching, we've reflected on it, so we've cognized it. And so we shouldn't reflect, we shouldn't delight in it. And so they were following the Buddha's advice. That's another possibility. Somebody was going to take the microphone.
Yeah, I think at the end you said because the delight is the root of everything. And so they did not delight means they actually truly understand. They reach that level.
Yeah, that's one possibility. Except that in, say, the other discourses, when it's said that the monks delighted in the Blessed One's words, that kind of delight doesn't imply the craving or the clinging or the attachment. Because even when the Buddha is speaking, say, to Sariputta or Moggallana, at the end, they delight in the Buddha's words, and they are arahats. Yeah, boy. Take the microphone, please.
Bhante will probably not delight in what I'm going to say. I like to read it in from a different light. I think the parinyatang probably is not a mistake. And I think this sutta probably set the stage for the Lotus Sutta to come, in which 500 arahats live. When the Buddha, they were not happy about what the Buddha said about the Mahayana Buddhism, right? So
but those monks, first in the Lotus Sutra, they're not described as arahats. If you look at it closely.
But the Chinese Buddhism always say when the Buddha preaches Mahayana Buddhism, 500 arahats left.
No.
No? So
maybe that's what the
mistake.
Chinese Buddhist interpreters say. But if you look at the words of the Lotus Sutra, it says 500 monks who thought they had accomplished what they had not accomplished. And so the implication is that those were 500 monks who thought they were arhats, but hadn't actually achieved arhatship. Look more closely. No, I'm very sure about this because I looked up that point a long time ago, not recently. And I looked at it in the Sanskrit original. I don't know, maybe the Chinese translator, Kumarajiva, phrased it as arhats, but it's not. But I believe even Kumarajiva translated it accurately.
So it's a myth that 500 monks...
I would say it's a misconception.
Okay, thank you very much. So that parinyatang is a mistake from Bhante's
I'm not
point
saying
of
it's I don't know for sure, but it's just that in Indian alphabets it would just take the addition. There would be more than one letter, but it could just be like it could be a copyist mistake. Because if the intention of the original text was to state something more comprehensive about the Buddha, it would say, because the Tathāgata sabbata sabbaso parinyatang tang tassa, that he's fully understood it, sabbaso in every way, sabbata in every aspect, would be more emphatic than using a rather obscure expression, parinyatang tang.
Does an arhat understand everything just like sabbata, sabbaso, sabbatata?
No.
That's reserved for the Buddha.
Yeah.
So in terms of their understanding, there is difference.
Oh, there's definitely a difference in the range of knowledges.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Mano? He's in the back row.
Bhante, quick question. Is this the only sutta that explicitly states that delight is the root cause of
Oh, no,
suffering?
no, there are many suttas which state that.
And those suttas conclude with the bhikkhus being delighted with the words?
I would assume so. Usually those suttas are very short, and so they leave out the ending part.
Yeah, I was just wondering if it would be contradictory to just state that the bhikkhus were delighted when it was explicitly stated. So I was just wondering if there's a link there.
Yeah, I think that probably we could assume that the monks delighted in the Buddha's words. Yeah, I want to come back. Tsering raised the question earlier. This is, how does one apply this in practical life? Yeah. In terms of the elements, I would say it's not so easy to apply in terms of the elements if we're going to sort of break things down into the specific elements. But I say that it becomes more practical if one simply thinks in terms of conceiving things by way of craving, conceit, and wrong views, particularly views of self. And so at the practical level, even for those of us who are still in the class of the uninstructed worldlings, the untaught ordinary people, we still have to make the effort to control thinking by way of craving and conceit, even if we don't hold, at least we think we don't hold wrong views. So when, let's say, we encounter pleasant, enjoyable objects, okay, then there's the natural tendency is for craving to arise. So if we think that, say, this object, say, okay, a man sees a beautiful woman, so there comes the impression, beautiful woman. Okay, if one then relegates this image of the beautiful woman, one could relegate it to the class of beings, and then one should think one should not conceive beings. One should not conceive the being as being beautiful, attractive, lovely, enticing. Or one could relegate the form to the category of things that are seen, amongst the seen, heard, sensed, cognized, and think one should not allow craving to arise in regard to the seen form. So in that way, one is controlling the conceiving in terms of craving. If one accomplishes something worthwhile or other people praise one, then there's a tendency for conceit to arise. I am great, I am wonderful, I am successful, and so forth. Okay, in that case, one should recognize that this is conceit. One is conceiving one's accomplishment, one's success, one's qualities in terms of conceit, and then control that conceit. And one controls the conceit by reflecting back on what is this that they're praising, but this is just an assemblage of the 5 aggregates. So are they praising physical form, feeling, perception, volitions, consciousness? Nobody praises that, but it's just, the grip on this idea, I am somebody, that becomes the basis for that conceit. If one thinks, I am nothing, then even if people praise you, no swelling of this conceit, I am great. If somebody criticizes you, blames you, then there's the opposite kind of conceit, the negative conceit. I'm miserable, I'm helpless, I'm worthless. If you do something wrong and people criticize you, then you bring in this reflection, there's just the 5 aggregates here, something wrong was done, but I shouldn't grasp upon the idea that I did something wrong, and therefore I am worthless. Wait, please take the microphone. And if you want to get full explanations, let us put in one more little plug. This little book has the full translation of the commentary to the Mūlapariyāya Sutta, which gives exemplifies how all of these different modes of conceiving take place.
Hello.
Yeah.
At one point, wasn't it said something about pleasure being the cause of rebirth or whatever? Suffering?
What is that?
Pleasure.
Pleasure.
But shouldn't it be lobha, dvesha, moha? Craving, anger, and delusion?
Yeah.
Is a problem for most of the,
Yeah.
wasn't there some statement in that thing about pleasure or happiness?
No, there's nothing that says that pleasure is the cause of suffering.
Yeah, okay. Moha.
Yeah. Of course,
okay.
the Buddha has a positive evaluation of pleasure. It just has to be a wholesome pleasure, not unwholesome.
And ignorance is the main cause, apparently.
And what?
Ignorance is the main cause.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Bhante.
And can I still make a guess why they are not delight?
Yeah.
Is the title of Sutra suggests that it's about ontological, metaphysical root of all things,
Yeah.
and it apparently is like root of all suffering. What the Buddha taught us.
Yeah.
It's not really root of all things from a metaphysical.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, it doesn't mean the root of all things in what you call the ontological or metaphysical sense, but it means the root of, according to the commentary, that all dhammas here are all the dhammas included within the 5 aggregates. So this is the root for the arising of the 5 aggregates, but not of everything in the sense of the whole the origin or cause of the whole universe. Okay, we will end the session here and then we'll come back after lunch for discussion. Okay, so now we finished the Mūlapariyāya Sutta, so we have just one more sutta to take. This is Sutta number 43. This is the great discourse of questions and answers. It's a very intricate sutta dealing with many subtle points of Dhamma. And then when we finish that sutta, that might take 2 weeks, at least 2 weeks to take. This is what I want to do after that, my plan. Tell me if you like this. For 5 weeks, there's a group of meditation subjects that are taught within the Theravada tradition. They're called the 4 protection meditations. That is, meditation on the qualities of the Buddha, loving kindness, the meditation on the parts of the body, and the recollection of death. So what I would like to do is have each Saturday to have one session devoted to one of these 4 protective meditations. Doing it the whole day. What we would do in the morning, we start at 9 o'clock, but with a half an hour of just quiet meditation, just to get the mind calm and focused, doing your regular meditation. Then I'll explain the meditation subject. That might take a half an hour with some questions, if anybody has questions. Then we'll do a guided meditation in the morning. Then we have the lunch, and then come back, and then from 1 to 3:30, 3:45, then we continue with that the meditation subject that I taught in the morning. So like one Saturday, recollection of the Buddha, one the loving kindness, one the parts of the body, and then the last will be the recollection of death. Then the fifth Saturday, we just bring them all together in one session. Does that sound good? No, until 3:30, 3:45. Because 4 o'clock they come in to do this. We have to do it here. At 4 o'clock they have the liturgy, evening liturgy. And it'll be like sitting and walking meditation. Excuse me? No prerequisites. Okay, so let us end the session with the sharing of the merits. Okay, so we share the merits with the devas, the bhutas or fear spirits, the nagas or dragon spirits, and with all sentient beings. Akasata chabhumata deva naga mahedika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasanang. Akasata chabhumata deva naga mahedika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanang. Akasata chabhumata deva naga mahedika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang. Etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe devanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe bhutanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe satanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Bhavagupadaya avici hetato etantare satakayupapanna rupya rupicha sanya sanino dukha pamuchantu pusantu nibuting. Okay, so we end with 3 half bows. Certainly the morning session can be put on Ustream. The afternoon session, because though there might be like some a session for questions, but it won't be like giving a Dhamma talk in the afternoon. But the guided meditation you would do on Ustream? Yeah, we could do it on Ustream.